Um, Good morning. Welcome to with our public members and our board members to the August 4th and 5th BRN board meeting. We will take a roll call to make sure we have a quorum. I will start. My name is Dolores Trujillo, and I have been appointed by Governor Newsom in the direct care provider nurse role. Elizabeth Woods.
Good morning, Elizabeth Woods here, and I was appointed by Governor Brown and in the advanced practice role.
Thank you. Imelda Seha-Buckwitz. Imelda? I think you're on mute.
I can't unmute myself.
Oh. Okay, we heard you just
now, Imelda. What's that?
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Imelda Seha-Buckwitz, appointed by the governor as a public member. Good morning.
Good morning. Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez, appointed by the governor.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan Naranjo, appointed by Speaker Rendon as a public member.
Mary Fagan.
Good morning, Mary Fagan, appointed by the governor and the Nursing Services Administration.
Thank you. Reza.
Good morning, Reza Pejirhesh, Board Legal Counsel.
And Lori.
Hi, I am Loretta Melby, or Lori, and I'm the board's executive officer appointed by the board.
Thank you. I believe we've established that we have a quorum. BRN moderator, can you give the instructions for the format for a teleconference call?
Thank you. Good morning. This is the BRN moderator. I will be moderating the meeting. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature. When the board reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, the question and answer feature will be turned on, and members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by inserting the phrase, "I would like to make a comment," in the question box, which is typically in the lower right of your screen. I will then call on the individual and unmute their microphone. The individual will have 2 minutes to make their comments. I will not give a warning as your time approaches. I will mute your microphone and will announce that your time has exceeded the time allotted. I will then move on to the next member of the public who has a comment. Please note that the question and answer feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. This is not a means to ask questions of the moderator or members of the board. Such inquiries submitted using this feature will not be answered. When asking a question, please make sure the question is directed at the host, me, in the dropdown. If any attendees utilize a profane name, they will not be called upon to prevent members of the public from being subject to profane language. While you are free to express criticism or negative views, for the sake of members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments to the board. I will provide a brief reminder of this approach at the start of each public comment item. Finally, when board members or senior staff are not speaking, I would like to remind them to mute their microphone. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can at this time open up for public comment and items for future agenda.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, I would like to make a comment. Victoria Bermudez would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Victoria, you're on here twice. I'm going to try this one first. Are you there? There you
Can you
go.
hear me?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning. Vicky Bermudez representing CNA. I just wanted to take a quick moment this morning to report that CNA this week applauded the state legislature and Governor Newsom for signing into law AB 128, which includes a one-time $10 million infusion into the Song Brown Healthcare Workforce Training Program. The funds are specifically to support BRN-approved pre-licensure programs with priority for public programs. This is critical to developing a strong RN workforce to care for California patients and communities. The COVID-19 pandemic has made our need for healthcare workers startlingly clear, in particular RNs who care for patients up and down the state. Given the current COVID-19 crisis, CNA sought after these funds and will continue to work with the legislature and the governor to ensure that additional monies set aside for workforce training will be prioritized to increase capacity for pre-licensure nursing programs. During the winter COVID surge, California waived its nation-leading safe nurse-to-patient staffing ratios, citing a lack of licensed RNs to provide care for the overwhelming number of hospitalized patients. Nurses know that this staffing shortage was a result of many hospitals' own failure to staff up and execute appropriate cross-training of staff. Because of this lack of preparation, California had to step in and assist in supplying RNs to hospitals in order to provide safe patient care. As of March 2021, EMSA approved 11,360 RNs and NPs from outside of California to assist in our healthcare facilities. AB 128 will be invaluable in helping to build and grow the RN workforce inside the state. Given the uncertainty of this pandemic and the inclusion of additional California residents into the healthcare system, now is the time for a real investment into our public health system. Strengthening our workforce pipelines for RNs is key to ensuring the highest quality of patient care for all people in California. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bermudez. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please close the window. Thank you. Okay, at this time, we will take a vote, review and vote on whether to approve previous meeting minutes. The minutes in question are May 12th through 13th, 2021, and June 16th, 2021. I would like to make a motion to accept these meeting minutes. Do I have a second?
Imelda Seja Bedgoritz would second your motion.
Thank you, Imelda. We'll take it to a vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes.
Dolores, sorry, this is Reza.
Oh, sorry.
Just a quick public comment check on these.
Thank you. So I would like to open this up for public comment at this time.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in the request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, I would like to make a comment. Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, I would like to make a comment. Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. We don't need to repeat that, Reza, do we?
No, unless anyone has uncertainty about what it is, I think it's clear to approve both 4.1 and 4.2.
Any comments from the
Understand.
members on the minutes?
This is Jovita Dominguez, and I have no comment.
Thank you, Jovita. Okay, we'll take it to a vote. This is Dolores Trujillo. I vote yes to accept the minutes from both meetings. Imelda?
Elder votes yes.
Elizabeth Woods?
Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez?
Jovita Dominguez votes yes.
Susan Naranjo?
Susan Naranjo votes yes.
And Mary Fagan?
Mary Fagan, yes.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to item 5.0, BRN future priorities and proposals for discussion and possible action. 5.1, discussion and possible action on regulatory proposal to modify California Code of Regulations, Title 16, 16 CCR, Section 1484, Nurse Practitioner Education.
Board Moderator, this is Lori. I would need to have Heather Hoganson elevated so that she can present on this.
Go ahead, Ms. Hoganson. You can also turn on your camera if you'd like.
Good morning. So this item is to correct some confusion in 1484 in the Standards of Education. The credit hours may actually exceed the minimum, and so we have a small change here in the regulation for your review and approval today.
Thank you, Heather. I can provide some additional background. This is Lori as well. Last year during the COVID pandemic and the outbreak, there was some confusion around 1484. There's a specific statement in there that says the minimum direct patient care hours are 500. However, the equation on the bottom used to calculate the credit hours per unit equals 540. So with Board Legal Counsel Reza last year, myself, we went ahead and make a statement that our licensing unit would continue to accept the 500, even though the calculation did not match. And we pursued to update and correct this regulation, sorry.
Does the board have any questions?
This is Elizabeth Woods.
Go ahead, Betty.
So, I just need a clarification. So it's going to remain at 500 minimum hours. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Per the regulation that was updated and passed and put into place in January of 19, that was the recommendation and the change. It just was a an error essentially, that it was not realized that the calculation equaled 540 and the direct patient care hours that were stated equaled 500. So this was to provide the clarification that if 500 is the minimum, however, we can't exceed.
Thank you.
This is Imelda Sehab-Batwitz. I would like to make a motion to accept the changes.
I would like to, Dolores Trujillo, I would like to second. Is there any other board comment before we open it up to public comment? Seeing that there is no other board comment, BRN moderator, can we open it for public comments?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Board President Trujillo, there are no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, go ahead and close the window. Thank you. Okay, we have a first and second on the floor.
And if I might suggest a clarification to the motion,
Sure.
by making this motion, you're approving it to go to the rulemaking process. So you would be approving the proposed regulatory text for section 1484, directing staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer, and Housing Agency for review, authorizing the executive officer to take all necessary steps to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing if the public requests one. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, you are authorizing the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations as noticed.
Hearing that, are there any comments from the board or questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and take the vote. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Imelda?
Imelda Selja Budkowitz, yes.
Elizabeth Woods?
Elizabeth Woods, yes.
Jovita Dominguez?
Jovita Dominguez votes yes.
Susan Naranjo?
Susan, yes.
And Mary Fagan?
Mary Fagan, yes.
Okay, the motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5.2, discussion and possible action on board accepting alternative means for processing of transcripts in accordance with 16 CCR Section 1410, Subdivision A.
I have a question, if you don't mind, Dolores.
Sure.
For Reza Legal Counsel, can we go ahead and do all of 5.1 and then open it at the end for public comments on any of the items? For legal
Sorry,
counsel.
Imelda, you're proposing to do what exactly?
So we can hear all the 5 points, and then at the end, we can open it for public comments on any of the items. Then take the vote.
I'm not sure what are the 5 points you're talking about.
The 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.4.
Oh. No, well, those are all kind of unique, different agenda items. If they were substantively kind of all similar, I might, in different situations, I might say yes, but they look to be, this 5.2 is about a regulation. The next one's about the strategic plan. The next one after that is a presentation from me, information only. So I think it makes more sense to just go through one at a time. But in general, and for groups of agenda items that are very substantively kind of related and intertwined, that sometimes that is appropriate. I hope I'm understanding correctly, and I hope that addresses that.
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so let me repeat 5.2, discussion and possible action on board accepting alternative means for processing of transcripts in accordance with 16 CCR section 1410, subdivision A. Lori, can you speak on this?
I'm keyed up and ready to go. Yes, Dolores, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll give you a background into why we are requesting this and then what the plan is moving forward with that. So we have two very distinct grad seasons each year. One starts about the March-April mark and goes into June. And then the second one starts in about November-December, and then takes the board staff quite a long time to process those applications. What we looked at is what we can do to speed this process up. If I look at the grad season from November to January last year, we had 3,980 applications come in for California exams, initial application by exam from our California graduates. So it's close to 4,000. This last grad season, to take that same time period in, is right about 4,000 again in the November to January graduation season. And then if I look again at the grad season starting in April going into the beginning of July, we had 6,282 graduates last year. And then I'll take that same time period this year, and we had 6,210 graduates this year. When we get the large amount of graduates like that, each one of those applications need to be entered by a staff member and reviewed. They have to receive the transcript from the school. They have to save that transcript individually. They then have to rename that transcript and upload it and connect it to the Breeze system, and then go through and clear off certain milestones within the application. That is very labor intensive, requires a lot of extra clicks. And, you know, in my previous roles, we looked at what we can do to lean down processes. What can we do to speed up processes? And so coming in, that's what we did the evaluation of licensing. Several people have been involved on this process. Last year, looking at the amount of technological updates that we needed, I was able to secure an outside contractor for IT updates. Right now, we have a pro rata that we pay out to DCA, and we utilize their IT, and it's amazingly helpful for us, but we are one of many boards and bureaus. So at the beginning of this last year, with the assistance of IT, a DCA IT and the blessing, they were able to give us a contractor of our own for this year, so we can put in a lot of these technological updates. This is one of them, so I'm very excited about this. What this process does is it allows the California approved BRN schools, the BRN California approved pre-licensure schools, sorry about that, to complete a form. They are already completing a form called a graduate roster, so it's no additional work on them. We will run the report of the students who have applied for licensure. We will run that report. We will send that report to the dean or director, whoever the designee is for that nursing program, and they will validate it. They will say, yes, these are our graduates, or no, this one is not our graduate. Please remove them from our list. Once we do that, and that form, one form, is looked at and validated per school, it will then be cleared to be uploaded to Breeze. That document that we would accept now in lieu of transcripts will automate our pre-licensure nursing program applications by exam. It will not require a hands-on opening of every single application or the staff to do that. So it will automate our licensing process for initial exams. Once that is automated, these students that have just graduated will receive their ATT, which is their authorization to test. We will clear them for examination, send that information over to Pearson VUE, and they should have their authorization to test within days. It is in the process of being built. It will be deployed. The plan is for a graduate class happening this month, if we can get board approval on this. It will then be tested again for another graduate class that's happening this month. We have 2 of them coming in August. And the hope is that we can go live for the graduate season starting in November. And this will be rolled out. I plan on doing a teaching on this process at the COADN CACN meeting that is scheduled for October. And my NECs are aware of this. I will be doing training with them because they will be pivotal with working with our program directors to make sure that the form is completed. The other thing that this will do is assist us with our enforcement process. Due to the long delays that had previously taken place with these, if there was an fingerprint issue or an enforcement issue, their application was held and they were not allowed to sit for their examination. That was changed as well. We have moved the fingerprint requirement to be from the license authorization to test to prior to licensing. So even our applicants that are having maybe an enforcement issue that they have to clear prior to licensing will at least be allowed to test so that they will not lose that knowledge. We will not lengthen it. There are several studies that talk about greater than 90 days shows a sharp decline in the ability to take first-time test takers and pass. So this will solve that problem too. What enforcement had done previously was create a waiver process that they had employed, which is, again, additional work by our enforcement staff and additional interaction with the licensee to request that, prove that, and move through that process. So that would be eliminating that process as well. And then we also have where this also trickles down to the back end as well. We get our NCSBN updates from Pearson VUE for NCLEX first-time test takers, and they're tied to the school code. When we run our report on the front end now, we run it by school code. That will be sent out to the school to validate it at this end. What's happening now is we will run those reports. We get them by school code. We have a NCLEX pass rate that we send out to our schools, and the school then says, wait, that's not a correct pass rate. That's not my student. They entered the wrong code. So by fixing this one item, not only do we increase the processing time, or decrease the processing time tremendously to days versus months. It also affects our enforcement and affects the interactions with NCSBN and the NCLEX having to update that on the back end. So in fact, we've been able to lean quite a few of our processes with this. This was also a recommendation that came to us and was validated as a need through the Enlighten License project that we are part of with DCA. And we are the first board as part of that we volunteered to be with. So in 1410, it says that the board it says no license shall be issued without a complete transcript on file indicating successful completion of the courses prescribed by the board for licensure or documentation deemed equivalent by the board. So my ask is that you would accept this process as documentation deemed equivalent by the board for our BRN California approved pre-licensure programs.
That's amazing. That sounds like a win-win. Any comment from the board or questions?
No, this is Mary. I think this is absolutely fabulous, Lori. Really appreciate the work on this and any other things that we can do similar to this. I think would be wonderful and definitely still maintain the standard, but makes it easier for everyone.
It does. It maintains the standard. This curriculum's already been evaluated by the NECs. They are all approved curriculums. We're able to move forward with this. My thought is if this goes well, which my fingers are crossed that it will, and I'm sure that it will. We have very much good support through DCA working with this and our IT contractor, that we will move this to the approved nurse practitioner programs as well. We will also look at this for our public health nursing certificates. Those are all curriculums that we approve. And if we can do that, we can take this load off tremendously. What we'll also see at that point is and I'll talk about this later on and kind of reiterate this, is it'll allow our board staff to work through some of the other processes that they need to have focus on in our licensing. So it'll speed up those processes well, and it will affect several other units. We've done an evaluation on our phone systems, now that we have an accurate phone system that will tell us our numbers. And the majority of our phone calls, I would say 95% of them are licensing related. So we'll be able to get that clarified too.
It's wonderful. Any comments, other comments or questions from the board?
This is Jovita Dominguez, and thank you so much, Lori, for putting an enormous amount of energy into this great process that sounds just like Mary said, fabulous, miraculous. Thank you.
It will revolutionize our board. It's great because when I came into this role, I remembered myself entering the first day of nursing school, and the first thing that your instructors tell you is take your NCLEX immediately upon graduation. The first 90 days are the key. A lot of programs will even give incentive that says if you take it within the first 90 days, we'll pay for your exam, you know, stuff like that. So anything that we can do to get out of our statute right now is 90 days, and that's too long. We typically, when we're not in grad season, process at 60 days. I challenged our licensing team to bring it down to 30 days. They said with our current process, we can't do that. So we worked at what we can do to fix our current process. And this is an amazing, amazing thing that will revolutionize our board, especially as we see our license by exam numbers continue to increase.
And Lori, this is Mary again. How many days did you say it should be for people now? You said days, right?
Days, yes. And so I'll kind of explain that process. I'll talk about where we're at right now and where we will be into the future. So right now, our students, we ask them to apply 2 to 4 weeks in advance. In our regulation, it says 8 weeks in advance, but our licensing deputy chief has really worked at changing that method to have the students apply about 2 weeks in advance of their graduation date. So prior to that, we do not have their transcripts. It's an incomplete application because we have to wait for them to graduate and we have to wait to get those transfers from the school. But for 2 weeks or longer, if the student applies prior to that, that license is sitting there untouched. Then once graduation is here, the dean or director, whoever the designee is at the school, sends in a list of students who have graduated. And then they then contact their registrar's office for a record so that they can get the transcripts. Sometimes that transcript processing at the school level is 4 to 6 weeks. So if you have a student that is applied 2 to 4 weeks in advance, and then that transcript process takes 4 to 6 weeks, the maximum amount, we're looking at 10 weeks with this student not even have their application touched because we process it in order of cohort transcript received. And so now that once the transcripts are received, then our licensing team has to divide those up. And the numbers I shared for you were 6,000 applications 2 times. One is about 3,000 one time a year and about 6,000 the next time of year when we do our 2 grad seasons. And that's all hands on deck. We pull licensed staff from helping out in other areas to focus only on our California grads to get those done through as quickly as possible. Well, sometimes it's 20 to 40 minutes that is taken to process each application, going in there and clearing out application milestones and clearing out and putting dates and checking the grad date and checking the transcript and going through that entire process. It's very lengthy. And so we can look at obviously pushing up against our statutory requirement of 90 days. What this process does now is we will again work with our students to make sure they apply 2 weeks in advance. That way we could run the report, send it out to the nursing program director to have them validate that in fact these are their students and they will be graduating. Once that validation is completed, we will run a final report the day that they graduate, no delay taken there, and we'll send that report to the dean and director. They will then validate that report saying, yes, in fact, all of these students have met the requirements of licensure and graduation, and this is the date that they completed that. Once that's done, that form will be sent back to our licensing unit, and one form will be evaluated, and then it'll be submitted. We will not have to do individual opening up of any of them. And depending on how quickly that dean or director can turn around that form, that is truly the only length of time that we have to wait on. It could be days from graduation for that to be processed. It doesn't even have to be a week, really, if we're able to get that graduate information in and completed by that school.
And those out of state, it's going to be business as usual, though.
Currently out-of-state transcripts receiving are identical to the process that has been in place. We are looking at that too. As you know, we have several ways that we license people coming into California, licensed by exam and licensed from endorsement. This will allow the endorsement applications to be processed in a much faster time frame because they will not have all hands on deck. The numbers are completely different when we look at them. We're into the thousands and thousands of with our California grads and hundreds of endorsements. So we will definitely be able to shift the workload and allow us to put focus and prioritize those. The out-of-state license by examination is currently going to be the same process. I am looking at what I can do to lean that process down as well. Right now, we require transcripts from every single school that graduate came from so that we can prove licensure. I don't think that is a good use of our time and validation. I need to be able to look at those transcripts received from those nursing programs to ensure that they meet our licensing requirements. And if that nursing program that they complete from meets our requirements and they have transferred credits in, then we would not need an additional transcript. Sometimes they send us 2 or 3 additional transcripts in addition to the nursing transcript. So that is a process we'll have to evaluate. The other thing is there was a law that was put into place, passed by the U.S. Department of Education last July, that requires any program that prepares a student for licensure in a different state for them to place on their website whether or not that school has met those licensing requirements for that state. All schools are not in compliance with that. However, my hope is that once we get every school, and we is not me, NCSBN is working with this, to get every school into compliance with that law that was passed by USDOE and implemented last July, that this will make our out-of-state processing for license by examination much easier, because we will know at that point that they have met our licensing requirements, and we will not have to do a thorough review of every single transcript received. That's to come. That's another process that I'm looking at to see what we can do to lean up and speed that up as well.
So in
anything I can automate is going to be the key.
In the meantime, would we want to recommend, I'm just thinking because I get asked this a lot, recommend that people who are out of state sit for the NCLEX in their home state and then apply for a California license by endorsement?
Either way, the good thing is now that we're addressing this workload, we will have the staff and the ability to process the other license into California in a more efficient manner. And so I don't know that would even be the recommendation. There is a benefit for them taking the NCLEX in the state that they were educated in, and that is that school is board approved in that state and therefore meets their licensing requirements. And that is a guarantee, because in order for you to sit for your NCLEX that is offered through NCSBN by Pearson VUE, is the requirement is that applicant must have finished a board approved program. And so that school must have been board approved in that state and therefore meets their requirements and can get licensed. So either way will work. I will be working this next year on evaluating each one of the 50 states and the 4 other areas to look to see which ones meet our licensing requirements. If we have states that meet our licensing requirements and I'm able to validate that and ensure that we stay on top of that in case there's some kind of a change, then if it's a board approved school from that state, then we know they meet our licensing requirements, we can look at processing those transcripts differently. But that is still a lot of investigation that has to happen, a lot of work that has to happen to do that. And I figured we'd start with the largest impact first, and that's our in-state grads. We'll then go to our nurse practitioners, our PHNs. We currently do not approve certified nurse midwife programs, and that's another one of our advanced practice and our certified registered nurse anesthetist programs. We do not approve those educational curriculums, so we can't roll it out to them yet. So we are starting with our approved nursing programs, both pre-licensure and advanced practice, and our certificates, which is our PHN. And then we will look at the out-of-state license by exam. In the meantime, we are continuing to work with our Enlighten License project through DCA to evaluate our endorsement process. I do have a meeting on our books for the later of this this week. So we will continue to work with that.
This is Imelda Seja-Petquitz. Thank you, Lori. That's excellent, excellent work. I have a couple of questions. When do you, if this is approved, when do you expect to start implementing the new process? And my other follow-up question to that, is there a fiscal impact?
There is no fiscal impact at this point. And so that's a great thing. And our plan to implement would be with a graduation class this month. That is the plan. We're hoping to do a soft launch and do a test pilot with a graduate class for this month. Our licensing department is very excited for this. I've been working with Christina Sprigg, DCA, Macaulay Fusarins, everybody's on board with this.
Very excited myself and looking forward to hearing at our next meeting how things are going. I only anticipate that they're going to go great and
I think
smoothly.
so. Yeah, by the November meeting, we should actually be fully launched. And so it will no longer just be, we're going to pilot it with one school and see if we can get that process kind of ironed out before we go live to all schools. But the plan is to go live to all schools in November.
I know applying to take the NCLEX and getting the ATT was a source of dissatisfaction for a lot of students in the wait time, and that you've done so well in addressing this, you and the board staff, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, couldn't do it without my team. They're pivotal to make this work, and it was a source of dissatisfaction for all of us, not just our applicants. We saw that we weren't serving well, and we wanted to improve that.
Good. Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing that there's no, excuse me, did somebody speak up? No? Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to make a motion to accept, to approve.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, Imelda.
That's my motion, to go ahead and accept accepting the alternative means for processing of transcripts in accordance with 16 CCR section 1410 subdivision A.
I'll second that.
And I second.
Okay. BRN moderator, let's open it up for public comment, please.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Aja would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Go ahead, Aja.
Thank you so much. This is Dr. Fazia Feroz Ali, Program Director for Chamberlain College, Sacramento. And I just want to applaud the team and Loretta Melby. What a fantastic process that you put in place. I'm really excited. I just wanted to put it out there that I do have a graduating class in August and would be more than happy to serve as a pilot for you. So that's my comment. And just thank you so much for all the continued wonderful work.
Thank you. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, close the window. Thank you. Okay, so we could take it to a vote. We have a first and second on the table. I will begin with myself. Dolores Trujillo votes yes. Elizabeth Woods.
Elizabeth Woods, yes.
Imelda Ceja-Buckowitz.
Imelda Ceja-Buckowitz, yes.
Jovita Dominguez.
Jovita Dominguez votes yes.
Susan Naranjo.
Susan votes yes.
And Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan votes yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on the agenda to 5.3, discussion and possible action on board's strategic plan for 2022 to 2025. So Lori, do we have a speaker that will lead us into this?
I don't think so, but let's check the participants and see if Tricia St. Clair is in the attendees, Mark. And if not, I will go ahead and present on this.
She is not.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. I'd reached out, but had not yet received a response. So I'm sure she has many other boards and stuff to deal with. So our the strategic plan that the board met and developed in June has been evaluated through DCA and has received the go to come back out for approval. We did put in that it's 2022 to 2025 because typically it is a 3-year process, but the board will need to decide if that's what they want to continue with. What occurred in the June meeting is we did run out of time. This is something that would have been completed in the June meeting, but now we do need to wrap that up so that we can start next steps. So what I'm asking is if you guys accept the 3 years, we can make the plan to be 3 years to accomplish. Once that is done and you guys approved the objectives within the board's strategic plan, then our board president will then write an introduction and board staff will work to, and I apologize, it's 4 years. Board staff will then work to do the action items to address this and bring that back in front of the board for approval. That is a hope to get those action items to the board by the November board meeting so that we can have a strategic plan implemented by January of this next year, sorry.
So to be clear, Lori, we are accepting the strategic plan draft that we worked on in the last meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
And then it is included in the meeting materials for review. If you guys are okay with that, then we can accept that. You can accept it for the 4-year time period for 2022, 23, 24, and 25. And once that is accepted, then Dolores, your job will be to write the introduction as the board president. And then I will work with board staff so that we can look at what needs to happen to get the action items in place to carry out the strategic plan. And then that information will be brought back forward to the November board meeting for the board to vote on and approve.
Okay.
Lori, this is Elizabeth Woods, and I'm need a clarification on why the time frame is different. It's now going to be 4 years instead of 3. Is that my understanding?
No, it's 4 years. I misread it as 3. I apologize. I misspoke. It is from 2022 to 2025. So it would be started in January 2022. That would be 1 year. 2023 is the second year. 2024 is the third year, 2025 would be the fifth year when we would then finish this plan up and start writing like we did this year, the next strategic plan that would then go into effect for those consecutive years.
Thank you.
I have a question. One of the pages in the strategic plan, page 57, is a placeholder for significant accomplishments.
Yes.
And it says that it's optional, but you might want to talk about what was accomplished, what objectives were accomplished in the previous strategic plan. And unless this happened before I joined the board, I haven't seen us spend some time to really evaluate our progress towards accomplishing the objectives that were set out in the previous strategic plan. Is that something that happened and I'm just not aware of it?
It is, and I'm sorry about that, Mary. We do address what is done within the strategic plan in several different reports. We utilize the strategic plan when responding to our sunset reports, and responding back to that, they'll ask specific questions related to our strategic plan, and then that's reported out through sunset. And then additionally, DCA does an annual report that we submit stuff to, and we talk about what we've done and accomplished based on that strategic plan as well. So those are the two avenues that those are reported out. If you would like, I can do a specific report to the board in the November board meeting that talks about the previous strategic plan and what has been done to address that. We could finalize the strategic plan, wrap that up, and get ready for our next one.
Yeah, you know, and I think that would be fabulous. And I think that, you know, what makes a strategic plan effective is that you really work it, right? And the last thing we want is to take something and put it on the shelf for 4 years and not have it drive action. And I know that the previous one has been driving action, because look at what you just told us about with moving forward with improving the NCLEX time and time for students to get their new graduate nurses to get their ATT. So I think that's really important. And I think the other thing that might be helpful would be to move beyond a strategic plan and then set like yearly goals, right? Like an operating plan for the year, perhaps, right? To say these are the metrics that we're going to track and hold ourselves accountable to. To me, that really helps give even more life to moving the plan forward.
I agree. That's something I've worked with in all of my previous roles. And our board staff is on board with that as well. So I have really good support with our team, and we will go ahead and make sure that that's implemented.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing that there's no, somebody just speak. Seeing that there's no further questions or comments from the board, BRN moderator, can we open it up for public comment, please?
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember, you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment."
Hey, Mark, as we're pausing for this, we actually need to get a motion and a second that did not come through prior to going out to public comment.
Sorry.
That's me. That's on me. So I would like to make a motion to accept the draft. Is it the draft or proposed?
It is a draft.
Yeah, draft of the strategic plan for years 2022 to 2025. Do I have a second? Is there anything else I need in that motion?
This is Jovita Dominguez, and I second that motion.
Thank you, Jovita.
And Dolores, is it to 2025 or through 2025?
Well, it's through 2025, correct? Because it goes to the end of
Yes.
5.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jovita, for your second. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay. BRN moderator, can we open it up now to public comment, please?
Okay, it has been open the whole time. We
Okay.
have no public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Sure, you can go ahead and close the window. Okay, we'll open it up to a vote. I'm Dolores Trujillo, and I vote yes. Elizabeth Woods,
Woods, yes.
Imelda Seja-Buckowitz,
Imelda Seja-Buckowitz votes yes.
Jovita Dominguez,
Jovita Dominguez votes yes.
Susan Naranjo,
Susan votes yes.
and Mary Fagan.
Mary Fagan, yes.
All right. Motion carries. Moving on to 5.4, Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee and PAC update. 5.4.1, information.
We actually have to finish 5.4, Dolores, before we go to 5.4.1.
We'll finish 5.4.
Yes. So I will go ahead and give the update from the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee. The Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee has met 3 times since it was formed. So as you guys have thorough knowledge of, we did start, we had the AB 890 that was signed into law last year. And then we immediately started to develop and post and receive NPAC applications. We started that in November of last year. We brought it to the board in December. And in December, we established individual committees to do the appointments for both the NMAC committee and the NPAC committee. The selection was completed. The approval of the committee was completed by the DCA director, which is required in statute. And then the board made the nominees in the February meeting. And then again in March for the final member. During that same time in March, that committee completed their board member orientation training. And we started the very next month in April with the first NPAC committee. During that first NPAC committee, a charter was voted on and passed on to the board, and the board accepted that charter in May. And we've been moving forward with that since then. We did hold another NPAC committee in May that separated them out into work groups. And as you know, with Baker Keene, we don't do more than 2 committee members, whether they're advisory committee or board members together to work on a project without it being publicly notified. So with this, they separated them out and they separate out into 3 subcommittees. The first subcommittee was focused on point 101, and that is direct related to the section within the statute that addresses. 101 focuses on the transition of practice. That is a requirement that needs to be developed by the board. It was written into the law that says the board must develop and pass regulations on the transition of practice. And so that is the very first subcommittee that was formed. We also have a subcommittee that will address section .103, and those are also now being commonly referred to as the 103 nurse practitioner. That 103 nurse practitioner is the nurse practitioner that gets to work without standardized procedures after completing the transition of practice, as long as they're working within some very defined clinical areas with other healthcare providers. Then we developed another subcommittee that is the 104, which is the section 104 of the statute as well. And that is also commonly referred to now as the 104 nurse practitioner. And that is the nurse practitioner that is allowed to work within their education experience and national certification after completing the transition to practice and after completing 3 years working as a 103 NP. So we needed to establish within the NPAC advisory committee the various regulations that need to be developed and put through the regulatory process. With that, after that was separated out, we did now hold an interested parties meeting, and that occurred in July by the request of the committee members. And so that went very well. It was 4 hours of receiving a lot of stakeholder input. And originally, the NPAC was scheduled to take place yesterday. It did not take place yesterday and has in fact been postponed to the August 31st date, and we will hold the NPAC committee then. And that allowed the NPAC committee members to really work on developing input on regulations based on the feedback that they received from the stakeholders. So the hope is at the August NPAC meeting, we have recommendations from our advisory committee that our board regulatory staff will get to work on, develop some regulatory language with DCA, and have some regulatory language to be presented to review and voting on for the November board meeting. If at the August 31st board meeting we receive a lot of public comment, we will not go forward with that. We will take that time, maybe schedule an additional stakeholders meeting, work through some of those public comments, come out with various other recommendations, and then present that at the next NPAC meeting, which is scheduled for November. Once the NPAC meeting scheduled for November, if that gets approved, then we will move that forward to the next board meeting, which would be scheduled for February. And then hopefully at that point, we could start the regulatory process. It is all dependent on the stakeholder input, what is put forth in the August 31st meeting, and how quickly we can move on that. Additionally, within the NPAC meeting, they asked our board legal counsel, Reza, to present specifically what is in the bill that was passed last year and what that means to the board and what it means to nurse practitioners. And Reza will be doing that in a presentation here at 5.4.1. The reason that it was decided to put it into a board meeting is, one, it allows you guys to be informed at the very same time that our NPAC members and our public is informed. Also, because our board meetings are webcast and recorded, then we can refer back to the section, or the stakeholders and public can refer back to this section for any additional clarification that they may need. And then this can also be shared out to our NPAC advisory committee, because it will be a public document at that point, and kind of serve the purpose of informing everybody and where that is. One of the stakeholder comments said that they did not believe that all of the committee members were aware of what 890 encompassed, what was already law, and what regulation is used within answering what was already law. It did seem like in the stakeholder meetings that maybe there was some misunderstanding that this was already a bill that was passed, that the law already stands and is in place, and we are just implementing this law. And so I'll pass that on to Reza when I'm done with this update here. Other than that, we are working right on target, moving quickly through this to make sure that everything is out and announced. We do have one statement up on our board at this point on the homepage that talks about the nurse practitioner working under 890. And just to provide some clarification on that, because transition of practice has not been established in regulation, all of our nurse practitioners within the state of California continue to practice as previously done through the use of standardized procedures with a collaborative agreement with a physician. Once the transition of practice is completed and other areas met, and we develop a licensing process with our IT, and potentially even a fee structure associated with that, get the OPS report to see whether an additional examination is needed, then we'll be able to open up the ability to do the 103 and the 104 nurse practitioners that are outlined in law. Are there any questions from the board?
I have a quick question. This is Susan. On the board materials, I know we're going to get that presentation that you just mentioned, but Is there anything that we should be looking at? I'm not seeing anything for 5.4 or 5.41. No? Okay, thank you.
5.41, there is a PowerPoint that has been posted onto the website. It's in additional materials. This was just a verbal update on the NPAC committee. I will be posting, we are working to create like an infographic that will go on our website as well in conjunction with potentially this PowerPoint that Reza has built to really allow for some more clarification.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
Lori, I have a question about the committee. You talked
Yes.
about different subcommittees within this committee. I'm not sure how these meetings go. Are the subcommittee meetings separate? Does the whole group meet? It's unclear.
The entire group cannot meet, Betty, because of Begley-Keene. So the two-person subcommittee is very similar to the subcommittee that you and Michael use to appoint the committee members. And so because we can have no more than 2 board members or no more than 2 committee members or 2 advisory committee members meet without it being publicly notified and having it be a public meeting, that is why that they have a 2-person work group that is working through that process. They will do their evaluation and then they will bring it back to the advisory committee. So it will be reported out publicly, but those work groups are allowed to happen 2 people in order for those advisory committee members to do the brunt of the work. Now, once that work is completed, they will present that at the next advisory committee meeting, sorry.
And the advisory committee meeting meets how often?
So they meet currently, the plan was that it would meet right alongside our board meetings. So our board meetings in statute are required to be held every 3 months. And the idea that was put forth in the charter and approved by the board here was that they would have 4 meetings a year with it being every 3 months to conduct the business identical to what the board does. We did do an additional meeting for the NPAC because they did have a stakeholders meeting in July. And so if you were to compare NMAC and NPAC, NPAC has already had 3 meetings and MAC has had 2. And so we do have an additional meeting for NPAC because they have a lot of work to get 890 implemented.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be a need for a lot of work to continue to
Yes.
get this whole thing implemented and not meeting so often. I guess I'm somewhat concerned that it's going to take a lot longer to get these things in order because they don't meet very often.
Well, so I want to address that. We had, the committee was formed in March and we had a meeting in April and we had a meeting 2 months later in June and then a meeting in July, I believe. And so we did have a meeting every month to now almost every other month, and we will be having from July a meeting in August. So we did have a meeting in July, June, July, and August. We are having monthly meetings at this particular moment, but we absolutely, Betty, can schedule additional meetings if needed and if the advisory committee members are present. I don't know that we could schedule more frequently than the monthly. Are you looking at something specific that I can help to implement and carry out for you, Betty?
No, sorry about that. I'm just concerned about how long it's going to take to get what needs to be done implemented. But do you think that that's happening, that it's moving along at a pace that the things that have to be accomplished are being accomplished?
Absolutely, yes. I wish that we were able to hold the meeting yesterday as originally planned, but our committee members needed additional time. So we did keep it within August, barely. August 31st is the date. And so we're working on getting this as quickly as possible. And that's why I said in the update as well, that if the August 31st meeting goes well, and the recommendations are made from the committee and passed to go to board, the board in the November meeting will have regulatory language to vote on. and implement the regulation process immediately in November. Again, it is dependent on the August 31st advisory committee meeting. If at the August 31st advisory committee meeting, when the groups report out the regulatory updates that they are thinking need to occur, and we get a lot of public comment and are not able to make a motion for it to go forward to the board, then we are prepared to hold an additional stakeholders meeting in September or October, depending again on the availability of the advisory committee. So it really is kind of hinging on this meeting that is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, and really hinging on what the public thinks and what that committee thinks on whether or not the board will have regulatory language to vote on by November. If not, the goal is for the next board meeting to have the regulatory language to vote on by the February board meeting. So 3 months after that.
I have a question about Bagley Keene with this.
Yes.
My understanding that this was all formed as one committee, but then broke down into these different subcommittees.
That is correct.
Then why are those different subcommittees? It seems, and maybe it's my confusion about this, and it probably is, but why are these different subcommittees under the Bagley Keene Act if they're all part of this one group to start with? Am I making myself clear, or am I making myself unclear?
Do you want me to try and respond?
Rez, I hear your voice. Yeah, I'll let you chime in.
This seems like it's my avenue. Thanks, Betty. So to kind of clarify what these subcommittees are and what they're doing and how it's kind of working, a couple things. First of all, under Bagley Keene, as you know, anytime you have enough members of a state body, whether it's a board or an advisory committee, who are gathering in one place to discuss a subject that's kind of within that entity's jurisdiction, that kind of discussion needs to take place within a public meeting that's noticed and an agenda published 10 days in advance and all of that. That of course is what we do, and there are nurse practitioner advisory committee, as Lori mentioned, has had quite a few meetings actually already in the pretty short amount of time that they've been up and running and operating. So that's one thing. The Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, the NPAC, did break down, I'm not going to say it broke down, but it did form those 3 separate subcommittees for the purpose of kind of assigning discrete chunks of the bill to smaller groups of the committee, so that a couple of things can happen. One, those smaller groups can focus and kind of be a little bit more focused on one piece of it as opposed to the whole thing. Secondly, those subcommittees, while it's critical that we have these public meetings that are noticed, one of the advantages of this kind of subcommittee that consists only of 2 members is that under Bagley Keene, they can meet outside of, they don't need to meet in a public noticed meeting. Now, the reason we do that is not to take anything out of public view. Eventually, these subcommittees are going to report everything right back to the NPAC in a public meeting. But the purpose of doing it that way is to allow them to engage in regular discussions, kind of have the flexibility to, and what's really happening is they're getting on phone calls or web FaceTimes or whatever, and just having these conversations and kind of hashing things out amongst themselves. And they've been working with BRN management and myself. We've had regular calls with them to kind of steer them as far as what they're doing, guide them in what they're doing, so that they know what they're actually doing. And I've told them that their kind of function is to come up with concepts to bring back to the committee, and not just necessarily what they recommend, but any feasible alternatives, taking into account the feedback that we've got from stakeholders who've had varying input as well. So that's what these subcommittees are doing. again, it is actually to allow this to progress, like you were asking earlier, and that work is happening, and it's through kind of a combination of these subcommittees who will ultimately report back to the NPAC. I hope that kind of helps. Does that?
Yes,
Do you have any questions based on that?
It does help. I'm trying to
Also,
absorb it.
good. One other thing I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that's kind of important, I think, is that while each of these subcommittees has been assigned a discrete chunk of the bill, 2837.101, 103, and 104, those members of those subcommittees are not kind of the exclusive input that the committee will necessarily receive about those portions of the bill. All the committee members are free and encouraged to review the bill, provide any and all input they have on the entire thing. But breaking it down this way also allowed them to have a little bit more focus on individual pieces of it. So just to kind of say that a different way, while a member of one subcommittee is kind of focused on, say, 2837.101, they can also provide input at the public NPAC meeting on other provisions of the bill, pursuant to a noticed agenda item. And that goes for all of the committee members. So I hope that helps as well.
Thank you.
And then one more update, Betty, that I actually forgot to include is the 0.105 section that is OPES. And so OPES is the department that is working on evaluating the various national certification exams and the need on whether or not an additional exam will be needed. And they're given until January 1, 2023 to come to that kind of recommendation. They have said to me that they believe that they will get it evaluated, completed by the beginning of this next year, instead of taking the entire year. And my fingers are crossed for that. But I wanted to let you guys know that we did have a nursing education consultant who is also an NP who volunteered to work with them. They've also met with various stakeholders. Our chief of licensing, Macaulay Fusarians, developed and sent out an application and kind of a call to action to all of the nurse practitioners that are certified within our board throughout the state. And we received 67 applications from those nurse practitioners to serve as subject matter experts. And they will be working with OPES to go through the various national certifications to see if it does in fact establish minimum competency and whether or not an additional examination is needed. And so there are 4 work groups that have been scheduled through OPES, and those nurse practitioners who responded and provided their CV and the information will be paired up with those, and that is working simultaneously behind what our nurse practitioner advisory committee is doing. And so we are orchestrating both of those functions to move as quickly as possible so that we can get that completed. As you know, with the transition of practice in 101, that is one subset. But when you go to the 0.103, there is a requirement that the board needs to make a decision on whether an additional examination is needed. And OPES is working with us to do that.
Just one more question. Is the APRN Advisory Committee in any way going to be part of or have access to the NPAC committee?
So I'll let Reza jump in with that one as well to discuss the Bagley-Keene process with that. But the APRN committee, because in law, in 890, it specifically states that all matters related to nurse practitioner practice, etc., and I can get the language if you want me to, Betty, must go through the NPAC committee. That is the law. So we are trying to streamline that as to not have any delays, not have any conflicts of interest, so that these matters can go to and through NPAC. Very similar to the law of SB 1237, where that was passed, that said all matters related to nurse midwifery must go through the Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee. And so it is not being handled through the APRN committee. And in fact, the chair of the APRN committee, Mitch Erickson, mentioned that he would try to ensure that the agenda items going forward did not conflict or overlap with the NMAC committee or the NPAC committee. And then Reza can go ahead and speak to the Bagley-Keene issue about having members of other advisory committees making comments on other advisory committees, because it's in fact kind of a gray area there. So just so that you're completely aware of that, Betty, that was something that we brought forth in front of our board last May. It is an agenda item on today's agenda as well, to discuss the future of the APRN. So I don't want to mix agenda items. I want to be able to give that its full of attention. But I want to read the statute on 2837.102 that says the board shall establish a nurse practitioner advisory committee to advise and make recommendations to the board on all matters related to nurse practitioners, including but not limited to education, appropriate standard of care, and other matters specified by the board. The committee shall provide recommendations or guidance to the board when the board is considering disciplinary action against a nurse practitioner. So they will be opining on practice issues, updating regulations, looking at board advisory statements, FAQs, disciplinary matters, etc. That will fall under the onus of the NPAC committee, identical to the onus of the NMAC committee, and so forth. So it does, in law, require a clear delineation of that. Reza, did you have anything to add?
Sure, I'll chime in. So just to kind of restate the question, I think it was, is the APRN Advisory Committee going to have a role in advising on AB 890? I think that's more or less it. Lori pretty much summed it up. I think I've been saying all along what Lori just said about the statute that requires the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee to advise on all matters relating to nurse practitioners. So it would seem pretty plain and obvious that anything relating to AB 890 is within the court of the NPAC, the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee. And with the APRN Advisory Committee, with the meetings that were happening late last year and early this year, frankly, in my personal opinion, it was starting to get a little bit kind of messy and confused as to what their role was with regard to AB 890 and that implementation. And a lot of well-intentioned positive input and feedback came through that committee, but frankly, as I was continuing to say, the NPAC was necessarily going to have to advise the board on everything relating to AB 890. So it was kind of confused what the role of the APRN Advisory Committee was in this arena. So as Lori said, I think more recently they have kind of taken a step back away from these nurse practitioner issues that are more in the court of the NPAC. And we do have, I think, an upcoming agenda item at 5.6, which is regarding the continuation and the possible, what the future of the APRN Advisory Committee might be, whether it is to continue or have the structure and scope of it changed. So that's a discussion that is coming. But yeah, in general, I've kind of advised that everything about AB 890, the advice that you're going to receive is going to have to go through the NPAC. That doesn't preclude the APRN Advisory Committee from necessarily, thinking about it and discussing it and raising issues and offering that advice to the board. But then it kind of gets still confused. Does that advice need to go through the NPAC first? It raises a lot of kind of messy questions. But that's all to be, stay tuned for the discussion at 5.6. Does that kind of answer the question for now?
It's helpful, thank you.
Very good.
And then Betty, just one more thing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Lori, I apologize. You mentioned the Bagley-Keene.
Yes.
I just wanted to. So the reason I think Lori mentioned that is that we've had issues where, I think Lori mentioned this as a gray area. I don't really consider it a gray area. It's more, I think what she meant is it's just not kind of intuitive common knowledge for lay people who don't know the Bagley-Keene Act inside and out. What it is that as I was kind of describing earlier, if you get enough members of a state body together to discuss something within their jurisdiction, they have to do that within a noticed meeting. So, can't get, a majority of the members of this board exchanging emails about an issue. That would be a violation. And you all know that pretty well, I'm sure. So any communications take place within these meetings, subject to, the exceptions like we were talking about with our small subcommittees of 2 people. But the concern that comes up is when, for example, we have, say, a board meeting and we get members of one of our advisory committee who are queued up for public comment and they start making public comments. That's, of course, as I've said all along, we value and appreciate the input, but technically that might end up triggering a meeting of that advisory committee because you've then got members of that advisory committee gathering essentially in the same place. Whether or not, regardless of whether or not they're discussing it back and forth between themselves, even if that's not happening, one person makes a comment, the rest of them hear it. Technically, that kind of fits within the definition of a meeting under Bagley-Keene. So there's language on our agenda in the boilerplate language that precludes our board members from participating during committee meetings. The same goes for our committee members. So that's what it was. But I think, looking ahead, we've talked, we've discussed in our advisory committee meetings, we've discussed the issue of how might these committees collaborate. That, of course, that's not one of them, the committee members coming and making public comment because we might run afoul of the Open Meeting Act. But we can come up with other ways if there is kind of an interest in doing kind of a collaborative joint meeting, for example. If there's an issue of common concern, for example, say between the NPAC and the NMAC, or the NPAC and, say all of our, if we end up having a separate advisory committee for all of our advanced practice groups, you could notice a meeting that would consist of multiple committees, as long as it's an agenda goes out that identifies that it's going to be a meeting of this committee and that committee, or multiple committees. I can imagine, basically the point is, I can imagine ways that we could set up meetings for collaboration to take place kind of across these different advisory committees. But right now we've kind of got this overlap that just has been, as I've said, a little bit kind of just confusing how to deal with it. So I wanted to, that was the Bagley-Keene piece. So thank you for that.
Thank you. And then just one last piece of information, Betty. The vice chair of the APRN committee was the very first expert that I connected with OPES, as I knew that he was pivotal in moving AB 890 forward and had a wealth of information that would benefit OPES moving forward. So the vice chair was connected with them as the first subject matter expert in order to get his valuable input on that. So the members that are a part of this process are able to communicate in various different ways outside of the APRN committee to assist with the movement of the implementation of AB 890 with the board.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. hopefully we were able to answer a lot of your questions, and just want to check in. I know that we've been addressing Betty because she's been asking the questions. Are there any of the board members that have questions or comments on this item? Great. As 5.4 was informational only, we do not need to require a vote or anything on that. And I believe we can go to 5.4.1. Is that correct, Reza?
Since it was a separate agenda item, I think a quick public comment.
Okay. Dolores?
Have a
Yes.
separate discussion.
So, BRN moderator, can you please open this up for public comments? Thank you.
We will be opening for public comment now. I will be activating the question and answer feature. Please refer to the screen share for members of the public to see how they should type in their request for comment. I've activated the question and answer feature. Members of the public can indicate that they would like to make a comment by typing into the question box, "I would like to make a comment." Please remember you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. I will not give a reminder as your time approaches. I do not want to interrupt you nor cause you to lose your train of thought. I will mute your microphone and inform you that your time has expired, and we'll move on to the next member of the public. I'll pause for a moment for members of the public to type in, "I would like to make a comment." Cynthia Yovanov would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Go ahead, Ms. Yovanov. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the board for being here. I appreciate the rundown of AB 890, but it sounds like we're just going in circles chasing our tail. And I think some of the comments of the future meetings and trying to get it together and trying to figure out is really a disservice to the nurse practitioners and to the public. The comment about the next meeting that Reeves is going to put a PowerPoint so everybody could figure out what the bill is really discouraging, because this should have occurred at the inception of the NPAC. And on top of that, the governor released tons of funding to expand behavioral health and public health services, and all you guys are doing is just delaying care for the underserved. And here we are sitting back waiting for a solid decision. The bill keeps getting misinterpreted over and over again when it just straight out read in plain English of what needs to be done for implementation. 103 and 104 is already defined. All that needs to be specified is the transition to practice. So we are now 8 months in to, in regards to this bill to be implemented, and nothing has been done. And it's a disappointment. You guys just went through, legislation in regards to the progress of your work and had a 1-year extension because the services of interventions, as well as any intention to move RNs, NPs, CNSs through the BRN, is delayed. So I am asking that this gets put into place, that a solution, a resolution is put into place, because you as the board have delayed care to the underserved. We are now going into another phase of COVID. So please move this agenda without further delay. It's really disheartening that we in California are depending on everybody, the BRN and the NPAC, who haven't figured out what the bill is, in order to address the crisis that we have and we will continue to have. So please make this a priority and aggressively move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yovanov. Katrina Reyes would like to make a comment. 1 second, please.
Hi, good
Go ahead, Ms. Reyes.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Katrina Reyes with the California Academy of Family Physicians. I would like to just urge the board to broaden the subject matter expertise for the occupational analysis, as the occupational analysis must be based on NPs performing the functions specified in BNP code 2837.103C and not on current NP functions, which then would require broader input and subject matter expertise on the ability of NPs to perform these functions. So again, I would just like to urge the board to broaden the subject matter expertise that are providing input on the occupation analysis beyond that of just NPs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Patricia Gurney would like to make a comment. 1 second, please. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Ms. Gurney? Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. I just want to briefly respond to the previous comment and to remind the Board of Registered Nursing that the Board of Registered Nursing has the authority over nurse practitioner practice. And as was previously stated by by Cynthia Jovino, the AB 890, which has been passed and signed by the governor, clearly defines the scope of practice and what is authorized by nurse practitioners within their scopes of practice. So the main thing that needs to be done right now is that you, without delay, go forward with implementing the measures of the bill that has been passed. Also make sure that the ongoing delays and obfuscations and arguments about, what may or may not be happening outside of the tenets of what has already been laid out in the bill be clearly defined in regulation, and that's the transition to practice. Thank you so much for your service. I'm a pediatric nurse practitioner. Our patients in California are depending on the Board of Registered Nursing to move forward on implementation of the measures of the law. And I also just want to remind you that yes, the law states that the NPAC is to have comment and input on all matters related to nurse practitioner practice, but they are an advisory committee. They do not have authority. You, as the Board of Registered Nursing, have the ultimate authority and ability to move forward on any recommendations. I want to thank you for the opportunity to give input. I want to also ask that you please utilize the expertise of our professional organizations who have longstanding knowledge and understand nurse practitioner practice as your content experts. So just thank you. Know that California Association for Nurse Practitioners is ready and able to assist.
Thank you, Ms. Gurney. Board President Trujillo, there are no other public requests for comment. Would you like me to close this window?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay, moving on in the agenda, we come to 5.4.1. Information only, discussion of the requirements of Assembly Bill 890.
That would probably be me. This is Reza, Board Legal Counsel. Thank you. You see up on the screen the slides that I'm going to be walking through. I apologize. I made those available rather late in the day yesterday. They're hot off the press, you could say. I apologize that you didn't have more time to review them, but frankly, I'm going to be walking you through every slide and explaining the contents and answering any questions that board members have. Again, if it's a little small on your screen there, those slides are available on the website. If you go to the BRN website, on the meetings page next to the materials for this meeting, there is a PDF of the slides for this. So if you have the ability to download those and open them there, then it might be a little larger on your screen. Also, if you've already flipped through the slides, you may have noticed I put the text of a couple sections in the bill. It's going to be extremely small. I just wanted to have that text somewhere in these slides. I think it's not going to be too useful to refer to depending on how big your screen is, but I wanted that in there. So anyways, I will be kind of asking our moderator to flip through these. Board members, you can hold your questions or you can chime in as you please. Okay, moderator, would you please advance? Okay, I'm looking at the slides on my screen. I need to advance at the same time. Okay, just a couple quick general points. As you all, I'm sure, know, NP is going to refer in the slides to nurse practitioner. I just wanted to mention this disclaimer at the bottom. I am almost certain that I'm not going to cover every technical detail of AB 890. I didn't really intend to. This is intended to be kind of a higher level overview and maybe telling you a lot that you already know. Hopefully it is, actually, but I may raise some issues for you to consider or not. But this presentation, just for context, was in response to a request from somebody making a public comment at an NPAC meeting. So that was kind of the impetus for this, and at that time the person from the public made the request. The NPAC members thought that sounded like a good idea, and as Lori mentioned earlier, we decided to hold it during a board meeting so that it would have kind of broader reach. So with that, next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the contents of the next slides. So first topic is going to be kind of looking at what was the state of affairs prior to AB 890, and then what did AB 890 do, kind of in general terms, and then looking more closely in a little more detail at the actual expanded scope of practice under the new Business and Professions Code sections, and then talking a little bit in general, just to give board members some general understanding of regulations and when you can and can't pass regulations, and then talking specifically about areas of AB 890 that may require some action from the board in terms of a regulation to get this going. And then just some examples of what we've done so far. Okay, next slide, please. So as you can see from our title there, the scope of practice of nurse practitioners prior to AB 890 was defined by standardized procedures. And as you can see, that asterisk, the first note there, prior to AB 890, nurse practitioners could practice pursuant to standardized procedures and could take on additional tasks and functions that the ordinary scope of authority to RNs they couldn't do. With AB 890, of course, as Lori mentioned earlier, that is still a perfectly allowable method of practice for nurse practitioners who want to continue to, or facilities that want to continue operating with standardized procedures. I don't really believe anything's changed as far as that. I referenced the code sections that define the criteria for standardized procedures. And by the way, as a side note, anywhere that there's an underlined code section, I tried to make those a hyperlink so you could click on it for the actual text of the statute. So the bullet points there list the things that nurse practitioners could do pursuant to standardized procedures that ordinary RNs could not do. Probably the big one is the second to last that allows nurse practitioners to furnish drugs or devices consistent with their educational preparation and established competency. So that was the state of affairs prior to AB 890, which of course continues today. And NPs being able to operate kind of expanded list of functions pursuant to standardized procedures. So next slide. So this slide, what did AB 890 do? I just wanted to, I know the focus of AB 890, as you all know, is really in section 2837.103 and 104. That's why that's listed first. Those are the sections that detail the expanded functions that NPs can do without standardized procedures. It did make some other kind of corollary changes to kind of go along with that. So I won't go too much into detail, but I'll just mention them briefly here, since the original ask was, what did AB 890 do? Second bullet, as you all know, it established the NPAC. The third bullet point and the fourth talk about section 650.01 and section 805 of the Business and Professions Code. Those are sections that apply generally to multiple healing arts boards. Now with AB 890, the BRN was kind of brought into those sections to so that those sections apply to NPs who are practicing under the new authority under section 2837.103 or 104. So section 650.01 makes it a misdemeanor for healing arts practitioners to refer a patient out to another entity that they have some kind of financial interest with. So you can't refer someone out if you're going to get kickbacks or something like that. So now NPs are likewise prohibited from that type of practice. Section 805 requires the filing of what's called an 805 report by peer review organizations, and similarly now those peer review organizations have to file those 805 reports against NPs who are practicing independently under the new authority. The next bullet point talks about the OPES requirement, which I'll talk a little bit more about. And then lastly, AB 890, as you heard in public comment, and as you well know, it delegated certain tasks to the Board of Registered Nursing to carry out before the bill could really be implemented. So final note on this slide, although AB 890 took effect and technically became law January 1, 2021, and it has been law since then, it did by its own terms direct the board to take some action before NPs could start to utilize it. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one, I just wanted to make a kind of a simple statement to contrast 2837.103 and 2837.104. When you look at the text of the actual statutes, it's quite lengthy, so I wanted to put it in just a rather simple statement. So section 103 allows NPs to perform specified functions within specified settings and organizations if the NP meets certain requirements. And the distinction between that and section 104 is that under section 104, the NPs can perform that same list of specified functions without regard to the setting or organization that they're doing it in. So under 103, they're limited to the settings and organizations that are listed in the statute. Under 104, they're not limited to those practice settings. And the other distinction under 104 is that 104, in order to qualify for it, you have to fulfill all the same requirements as under 103, as well as some additional requirements, and you have to have an active certification from the board. So under 104, there's a certification that's required expressly by the statute. Under 103, it doesn't expressly require a certificate. And then at the bottom, that note, just some more kind of corollary changes. Next slide, please. So this is where, as I said at the beginning, the text is quite small. I'm not going to read through it here. I just wanted that in the slides. Next slide. That's the end of the previous section. Next slide. Okay, so here is what you just saw, the full text of section 103, but just in case it might be helpful to anyone, I wanted to provide just kind of a graphic breakdown of the provisions there. So the top box in red there is, Okay, so the top box lists the requirements for nurse practitioners to qualify under Section 103. Second box lists the sections, the settings and organizations in which they can perform the expanded list of functions without standardized procedures. And then that third box at subdivision C lists the specific expanded, the expanded list of functions that they can perform without standardized procedures once they qualify. Now, Section C, that third box, that lists the expanded set of functions that NPs can perform under Section 103 and 104. Next slide, please. Again, just the full text of Section 104 there. Next slide. And here again, a graphic breakdown of it. So the first box, I was just kind of reiterates what I just said, that the under Section 104, the additional functions that NPs can perform is listed. It's the same set of functions that's listed in Section 103. And then that next box on the 104 page lists the additional requirements that NPs must satisfy to qualify under Section 104. The additional 3 years of practice, the certification, etc. Next slide. Okay, so this slide is not specific to AB 890, but I wanted to include it to provide you with information for your thinking about AB 890. So the process for developing and establishing regulations is outlined in the Administrative Procedure Act. The link to that act is there in the slides. I'll read briefly the definition of a regulation because I want you to see that it's pretty broad. A regulation is defined as every rule, regulation, order, or standard of general application, or the amendment of any of those adopted by any state agency to implement, interpret, or make specific the law enforced or administered by it, or to govern its procedure. So the keys there, a couple things. One is it starts out with a pretty broad statement. Every rule, regulation, order, or standard of general application. So that can cover quite a broad set of things. And then it's any of those that are to implement, interpret, or make specific the law that the agency is governing, in this case, the Nurse Practice Act. The reason it's kind of important to know that definition and to keep in mind is that anything that fits within that definition and that could be considered a regulation needs to go through the formal process outlined in the Administrative Procedures Act. And that's the process that, as you've heard, can take a year or more. The reason that process takes quite a while is it's outlined in statute. It's purposefully designed to promote, really critical thinking about change that's going to be made that's ultimately going to have the force of law, and to allow plenty of opportunity for public input into it, so that there's public comment periods built into it. There's oversight from the Office of Administrative Law, as well as several layers of review internally that have to be passed. So the point is, anything that fits within the pretty broad definition of a regulation needs to go through that process. Another thing that you need to know is that regulations need to be necessary. So there is a necessity standard. The Office of Administrative Law reviews proposed regulations and evaluates them for that, among other standards. They evaluate it to determine that the regulation is indeed necessary. By statute, that necessity standard means, quote, the need for a regulation to effectuate the purpose of the statute that the regulation implements, interprets, or makes specific. The reason I bring that up is that if a statute by its own plain language is sufficiently clear for the agency to implement without any room for interpretation or discretion, then it doesn't really need a regulation to implement, interpret, or make that statute specific. On the other hand, there are statutes that either specifically call out an agency to develop regulations, or the statute may be subject to interpretation or may leave some room for discretion for the agency, in which case there is room for the agency to pass regulations. So that last piece on this slide, I kind of summarize what I just described there. There are essentially three types of statutory provisions insofar as this issue. The first is a self-executing statute. That's a statute that is clear by its own plain language. The wording of the statute leaves no discretion to the agency, and therefore there's no regulations needed to interpret it. The second type is what's called a wholly enabling statute, which delegates discretion to the agency, and it does need a regulation to interpret it. An example of that might be the transition to practice statute at 2837-101, because it specifically, explicitly in the language of the statute, tells the board to develop regulations to define the minimum standards for transition to practice. So that's a statute where it necessarily needs regulations to implement, interpret, or make that statute specific. And then the third bullet point is kind of the wobbler category that's called susceptible to interpretation. Those are statutes that they don't explicitly tell the agency to develop regulations, and it's not quite as clear, as for whether the agency needs regulations or not. But those statutes are, as the title implies, susceptible to interpretation. So there may be some room for the agency to apply discretion in implementing that statute. And if the agency wanted to apply that statute on a case-by-case basis every time, then the agency doesn't really need a regulation. On the other hand, if that statute leaves room for discretion for the agency, but the agency wants to have a, quote, standard of general application, or just a rule that they're going to apply across the board to implement that statute, then that's where there is room for a regulation. And in fact, if the agency is going to take kind of a standard approach, they may in fact need a regulation. So that's it for the general overview. I hope that helps. If anyone has any questions, I can pause for a moment there before kind of diving into the specifics of AB 890.
Any questions or comments from the board? No?
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so the next few slides, I'm going to go specifically into areas of AB 890 that appear to need potentially some regulation. And as we go, I'll kind of identify which ones you necessarily will need a regulation before implementation, and which ones you don't necessarily need one in order to actually implement the bill. So the first one is the most obvious, define transition to practice. Hopefully you can see the text on whatever screen you're looking at this on, but this is from section 2837.101, subdivision C, which provides some criteria in statute for what transition to practice means, but it also says, quote, the board shall, by regulation, define minimum standards for transition to practice, end quote. So that's the obvious one. As Loretta and I have mentioned, the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee has a subcommittee that is looking specifically at that piece. Of course, the rest of that committee, as we've informed them and you, is able and hopefully is contemplating this as well if they have any feedback. And but we're working on the minimum standards for transition to practice. So that necessarily needs to be in place before we can start to implement this. Otherwise, if we didn't have a regulation to define transition to practice, and we started to just allow NPs to practice under Section 2837.103, there's a real question over how do we implement this. It's really not clear because we don't, they have to meet this transition to practice requirement, but the bill itself only gave us a portion of the definition. So we talked about that, I think, quite a bit. Unless there's any questions on that, go to the next one. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one looks at the statute in the bill that directed the board to establish the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee, specifically the portion of that bill that says, quote, "The committee shall provide recommendations or guidance to the board when the board is considering disciplinary action against a nurse practitioner." You can see I made it pretty clear on this slide that depending on which way you go about this, you may or may not need a regulation. Also, as Lori mentioned, the Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee has essentially a identical requirement that committee provide recommendations or guidance to the board when the board's considering disciplinary action against a nurse midwife. So I would imagine probably the board will want to establish a process that's the same for both committees. Now, I read the text of what the statute says, but as far as how exactly to implement that, there's, I think, room for discussion. One kind of obvious way to implement that would be for every disciplinary case that would have been sent to the board that involves a nurse practitioner, that those same materials be sent to the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee first, and that committee develop their thoughts on that specific case and develop guidance that they then send to the board. So when the board receives that case for consideration, they get the materials that they always receive, which generally includes an accusation and a proposed decision from an administrative law judge. But in addition, they'd receive some guidance from the NPAC. That's one way to do it. Another concept that has come up, as you know, the board has written disciplinary guidelines that are used by the board and by administrative law judges to kind of establish a uniform starting point for the discipline that's imposed. So the concept that's kind of been floating around is to have the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee and also the NPAC provide input on the disciplinary guidelines, and so that those disciplinary guidelines may be updated so that you could say then the Nurse Practitioner Advisory Committee has provided recommendations or guidance to the board on disciplinary actions against a nurse practitioner. So that might look like, specific portions of the disciplinary guidelines that call out a distinction for nurse practitioners, for example, or maybe a separate section that talks about standard of care for NPs. There's different ways to treat it in the disciplinary guidelines, but that's kind of the general idea. Or some combination of the two. For example, though the advisory committees provide input to update the disciplinary guidelines for cases that involve those specific advanced practice groups. And maybe also there are guidelines that state when a case should be submitted to the NPAC before being submitted to the board. So you could send all the cases to the NPAC before the board, some of them, or maybe none, if you're comfortable with just relying on their input on the disciplinary guidelines. So I just wanted to highlight that issue, that's a piece of AB 890 that leaves some room for the board to kind of determine how it wants to go about it. There was some discussion in the NMAC meeting yesterday. Of course, that pertains to SB 1237, not AB 890, but because it's basically analogous, I mentioned it here. The NMAC was in favor of a system like what I described, where they have input on the disciplinary guidelines, as well as they will consider recommending to the board that certain types of cases get sent to the NMAC before it gets sent to the board. So that was where the NMAC stood on it. The NPAC, I'm sure, will consider this issue, and I think, as I said, the board will want to establish a process that's kind of mirrors that mirrors each other for the NPAC and the NMAC. But as I said, for right now, the NMAC decided that our current disciplinary guidelines, they were willing to adopt those as their input to the board on cases that involve nurse midwives until such time as we can update our disciplinary guidelines and get a process in place to have cases routed to them for their input. So the NPAC may take a similar path on that. So that's where that's at right now, and it will be, of course, an issue to be sorted out, but it's not, I think, at the top of your list in terms of getting, a necessity for regulations to implement the authority to get nurse practitioners out there practicing under this bill. Any questions on that?
Any questions?
Not hearing any. If you have any questions, I can answer it now, but this may be something to add to a future agenda. I'm going to emphasize, of course, that our focus ought to be on the transition to practice and some of the bigger pieces of this. But okay, not hearing any questions. So next slide. Okay, so this is one where you don't necessarily need a regulation to implement the bill, but if you want to take some action, then you'll need a regulation. This is the piece of Section 2837.104, which lists the requirements for nurse practitioners to qualify for that authority. One of the requirements is that the nurse practitioner has practiced in good standing for at least 3 years, not inclusive of the transition to practice. However, this is subdivision B1C of Section 2837.104, which reads, quote, "The board may, at its discretion, lower this requirement for a nurse practitioner holding a doctorate of nursing practice degree based on practice experience gained in the course of doctoral education experience." Again, our nurse practitioner advisory committee has a group that's specifically looking at that issue and evaluating the pros and cons and different viewpoints on that issue. And so they're actively working on that. And as Lori said, the meeting for yesterday was a little too soon to have meaningful input from all of our subcommittees, but I anticipated our next NPAC meeting that will have at least some input from our subcommittees. But so that issue that's highlighted on this slide is being looked at. If the board wants to lower the requirement for NPs holding a DNP, it will need to pass a regulation. But unless and until that happens, the requirement will be what's written there in statute. Moving on, next slide. Okay, so this is an area of AB 890 that will require some regulations. However, it's more of kind of an administrative function. It's not really so much of a policy issue that's going to be, the board needs to determine. So as I said, under section 2837.104, NPs will need to obtain a certificate from the Board of Registered Nursing in order to qualify to perform that expanded set of functions outside of certain settings and organizations. So the board will need to establish that certificate in regulation, essentially, informing interested nurse practitioners that, the application process and just outlining that there is in fact a certificate that they need to apply for. And then the second highlighted piece on that slide says the board may charge a fee in an amount sufficient to cover the reasonable regulatory cost of issuing the certificate. We have fees for all of our licenses and certificates, so this would be no different. However, all those fees are outlined in regulation. Again, here, I don't think that the board is going to be making kind of a policy decision. Usually with fee regulations, that process may involve what's sometimes called a desk audit or something similar, where there's kind of an evaluation of the person power, the number of hours that go into processing an application for this certificate and actually issuing it and everything that, entering it into the system and all the tasks that need to go into issuing these certificates. So there's that assessment, and that kind of informs the analysis of what's a reasonable fee to charge. So we try to set it at an amount that covers that cost, but not more. Board regulatory staff and board reg council will probably be kind of leading the push on this piece, because, as I said, it's more of just an administrative piece, not really a regulatory policy decision to be made by the board. Nevertheless, it's included in here because it is going to take some regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is another big one. It's section 2837.105, which, as you know, outlines the process for the board to work with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Professional Examination Services, or OPES, or OPES. It requires OPES, basically it requires, I'll say, 3 steps. 1, OPES to perform an occupational analysis. 2, and step 1, by the way, is the step that has a deadline of January 1, 2023. Step 2 is once that occupational analysis is complete, or I don't know that it's necessarily upon completion, but the board and OPES will assess the competencies that are tested in the national NP exam. And actually, they will need the occupational analysis, because step 2 is to compare the competencies that are tested on the national exam against the competencies that are determined to be necessary in the occupational analysis. So OPES will be looking at the list of functions that NPs can now perform under AB 890 and determining whether the national exam adequately tests for all the competencies that NPs will need. Step 3 is, if the national exam is not adequate for testing these competencies, then the board will identify and develop a supplemental exam. So this is a little bit of a kind of a tricky aspect of the bill, because section 2837.103 requires, one of the requirements for NPs is that they pass a National Nurse Practitioner Board Certification examination and, if applicable, any supplemental examination developed pursuant to paragraph 3. So once the board develops a regulation for transition to practice, if the board hasn't completed the assessment about the supplemental exam, it's not quite clear, or it's not explicit in the statute anyways, are NPs then free to take advantage of Section 103, or is the determination on this supplemental exam a prerequisite? Either way, it's kind of a paradox, because if NPs are allowed to start practicing before the board has made a decision on the supplemental exam, and then later the board does impose a supplemental exam requirement, either one of two things will have to happen. The NPs who started practicing under 103 will either have to stop and take that supplemental exam and pass it, or those NPs who started before the supplemental exam was established will have gained the expanded practice authority without having taken it, and frankly, without having established the competency that the legislature apparently wanted them to establish. Based on that last point, it seems pretty logical that the supplemental exam, the determination on whether a supplemental exam will be necessary, is kind of a prerequisite as well. I don't think the legislature really intended for NPs to be utilizing this expanded authority without having demonstrated competency to perform all the expanded functions. But that's a piece of the bill that, frankly, I think I wanted to mention it. I hope to be able to kind of downplay that issue a little bit, because we are, contrary to some of the public comments you've heard, we are moving pretty quickly and aggressively forwards with this. My hope and my encouragement to you is that we aim, as I think we already are doing, for having as much of this done by January 1, 2023 as possible. It will be tight given the time frame for regulations, given the kind of the magnitude of this bill, the importance of it, and the difference of opinions out there. We've heard a lot of comments to push this, but interestingly, at the stakeholder meeting that the NPAC held, we did get some comments that said this really needs to be, not rushed, and that's so. There was kind of a balance of perspectives there, but nevertheless, I think my encouragement is to move purposefully. That is, not hastily, but just efficiently, and with an eye for the kind of big picture items that need to be tackled, and that as we already are on the path of doing. That's the transition to practice piece and this supplemental exam. The next slide, you would, moderator.